What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of California Underground. As you can see, I'm rolling solo tonight, which is fine. A lot of people are busy right now with campaigns and stuff like that. So we're going to talk tonight all about what is this. We're going to talk about the debate that happened this past Sunday. Now, this is the old Noodle special where Noodles decided he wasn't going to debate at like prime time or anything like that. So what he did was he set it up where he was going to debate Brian Dahle, who's a Republican candidate for governor, uh, Sunday afternoon, right in the middle of NFL football, while everyone's hanging around watching NFL football. And no one really paid attention. It was also just on this one channel, KQED. It wasn't really like a big thing. I don't think a lot of people really knew about it. So I guess it's sort of better that it actually had like cameras and stuff like that because before when he went against John Cox, it was it was only on the radio if I remember correctly. So the fact that they actually stepped it up and there's cameras now, um, I guess is a big step forward. So it's a little. I mean, it's about 58 minutes long. The last part is some like mushy stuff about what do you like about the other candidate. Let's all get together and sing "Kumbaya" and stuff like that. But there's a bunch of stuff that I want to point out and talk about. Nothing really kind of new, or I would say like groundbreaking in terms of what we know, what we don't already know. There was some gotcha moments and stuff like that. It did feel a little bit like 3-on-1 at a certain point because it was you had the two moderators kind of going after Brian Dahle, and then you had Gavin Newsom. So it was a little bit of 3-on-1. They did push back a little bit on Gavin Newsom on some things, but overall, I would say it definitely looks like Newsom is the more polished debater out of the two of them. Brian Dahle held his own. But let's just jump right into it because this is 58 minutes long and there's a lot I want to touch on, and I don't want this to be a 2-hour stream. So let's hop right in, and I'll zoom out down here, and let's away we go. Okay, I'm going to stop right there because I've made this point before about the idea of or not hearing any audio. You're not hearing anything from the screen share. You're not hearing anything. All right, let's figure this out. New computer, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. Try this again. Let's see. Um, okay. Wait, I think I have it. Ah, I know why. Hold on 1 second. Hold, please. Just got a new computer, so I was all excited about this. Um, and I think I know why it's doing this. Nope. Nope. This will have to be edited out in post audio. Stick with me. I think I figured it out. Okay, here we go. I think I'm ready now. See, the problem is I switched to a Mac, and once I switched to a Mac, that was the problem. Oh, geez, come on. There we go. There we go. Okay. And this should be, and tell me now.
to defeat Proposition 1. I work with legislative leaders to get Proposition 1 on the ballot. It's foundational, the core values of the state of California. It's something that I enthusiastically support.
But what about your record? That's really what I'm.
As it relates to broader issues, I'm very proud of the fact that as we speak, we're sending out billions and
You
billions
just
of
give me
dollars
a
in
thumbs up or
inflation
thumbs
checks.
down in the chat.
We're sending out $9.5 billion to be exact, up to $1,050 for hardworking Californians to address the issues of inflation.
So as I was saying before it got cut off there, he launched into this whole thing about Prop 1. And he talked about how it doesn't protect, he's not for reproductive freedom. And I always find that interesting that they always talk about reproductive freedom because all of a sudden it's this whole thing about reproductive freedom. And if it's reproductive freedom, if it's reproductive justice, then there should be equal amount of attention and tax dollars and all of that going to people who actually do want to reproduce, right? This is not reproductive freedom if you're saying there's only one choice that the state absolutely 110% backs, which is abortion. And that to me is not reproductive freedom. So that's sort of the clever wordplay of we don't want to say abortion, so we say reproductive freedom, like this big empowering thing. But what about the couples that actually want to get pregnant and want to have a child? There's no resources out there. You have to pay for everything out of pocket. So to me, it doesn't seem quite fair. And I think that's one point that if I was in the debate right now, let's say if I was sitting across from Gavin Newsom, I would say, you keep using this word about reproductive freedom, but have you said, okay, we're going to make it free for people who want to get fertility treatments or IVF or anything like that? Have you made it free for that? Then it's not reproductive freedom. You're only giving people one choice. That's not reproductive freedom. What you're basically doing is saying, this is your one choice. We fully support it. Why they're obsessed with it is still up for conjecture and for debate, but that's something that they inevitably have clung on to. And Roe v. Wade did inject a little bit of life into the Democrats. I would say I don't think it's going to land as much because that was a long time ago, Roe v. Wade. A lot of people are sort of, when it comes to politics, 5 or 6 months ago is a lifetime. And yeah, it's something that they're going to hammer on, and he hammers on this whole thing a lot about Prop 1. So, but we got a lot to get to.
Address the issue of the cost of gas and food and other pressing issues in the state of California. As relates to the broader issues, as relates to climate change and the work we've done, we have no peers. California is leading the way. My opponents consistently opposed those efforts. In fact, you'll hear today, unquestionably, his efforts to reinforce big oil's talking points, double down on the efforts that put us in this very difficult place as it relates to the extreme weather and extreme drought that we are working through in the state of California. But I'm very proud of our record over the course of the last few years. I'm very proud of the work we've done to seed reforms into the future. I'm very proud of the efforts.
Big oil, which is obviously another buzzword for Democrats. Big oil, big scary oil.
Dahle, many of the positions you do support are out of line with the majority of Californians. The governor mentioned abortion. We could talk about gun control, LGBT rights. Why should the majority of Californians give you a chance if they do disagree with you on some of these fundamental issues?
Well, first off, I want to thank Scott and Marisa for putting this debate together. And I want to start out by thanking the governor for taking time out of his going forward on his dream of being president of the United States and actually coming to California and having a debate. So I really appreciate, Governor, you taking the time out of your busy schedule to focus on those issues that we just talked about in California. Number one, first,
I think that could have been landed a little bit better. You could tell that was a scripted answer. That he already had that geared up. He was ready to go. I think he stumbled over a little bit.
I'm in tune with the climate every day, and it is changing, no doubt about it. But the policies that he's put forth aren't actually doing anything to help the climate. He is driving up the cost of gasoline and electricity. By the way, Californians pay 70% higher electricity rates than they do across the nation, $2.50 a gallon higher gasoline than they do in Nevada, just a few miles away from our state here, more than the state of Hawaii, which has no oil wells.
And yet his climate package and positions have been very popular with voters.
Well, I don't know if he's been out on the street or have you been out on the street talking to people who can't afford to live in California. People are fleeing California.
They're very popular. And I will say this. Popularity does not, and this is why democracy is such a dangerous thing is because popularity does not equate that it is right. If a majority of people think it's okay to, I don't know, exclude a certain group of people from society, but the argument is, well, it's very popular and it's democracy, right? The majority said it's okay. That's what we do. Just because there is a majority opinion on it does not make it correct. It does not make it morally correct. It does not make it the actual right solution. So the idea of, oh, well, they're very popular, so obviously he must be right. No, I think they're very popular because they have sold this idea of being a climate activist as giving people a larger than themselves purpose. I think it's given them this idea of like, I'm helping out, I have this higher cause that I'm helping with the climate. When you really get down to the nuts and bolts, and we've talked about it on this show, a lot of the stuff you look at, like solar panels, are not great for the environment. Windmills are not great for the environment. A lot of this stuff is really not great for the environment, but it makes people feel good to vote for this stuff. So at the end of the day, yeah, just because it's popular, it doesn't necessarily make it good.
California because he can't afford to live here. He's driving up the cost of everything in California. And I get calls in my office every day from hardworking Californians. In fact, just yesterday, I was at the gas pump and a lady put $2.37 worth of gas in her car, a third of a gallon of gas. And Governor Newsom probably doesn't care about the folks that are having to pay these high rates. So Californians are suffering. They're fleeing California. They're going to other states where he's campaigning nationally to expand on his California or his dream.
Well,
But Californians are suffering.
We're going to get to gas prices. Governor Newsom,
I'd love to pick up a little bit. I mean, Ryan, in every single instance, you've opposed common sense efforts to address the issue of climate change. You've opposed our climate package. You continue to double down on talking points of the big oil companies.
Talking points of the big oil
consistently
companies, there's the buzz.
Vote against efforts to address the underlying issue we're trying to address in not only the state of California, but across this country and around the world. The hots are getting a lot hotter. The dries are getting a lot drier. We have atmospheric rivers. We have unprecedented extremes leaving us in a position where we're dealing with unprecedented drought and wildfire, yet you consistently vote against common sense efforts to address those issues, including, by the way, you voted against $2.7 billion to address the issue of wildfire prevention, forest health, vegetation management. You consistently have opposed, including these rebate checks, efforts to provide relief for gas, and you've doubled down on the talking points of big oil. And you know why big oil is supporting your campaign? The hundreds of thousands of dollars you've received from big oil is not only because you double down on their talking points, but you consistently oppose efforts, including the latest effort to go after their price gouging. They're ripping us off. They're ripping you off. They're ripping every one of us off. And we're going after these companies.
So they go into this really interesting, well, not really interesting, but this becomes sort of a talking point about the gas prices. And I want to break it down when he talks about it a little bit more, but it is interesting. Again, it's about gaslighting and obfuscating what the truth is with Gavin Newsom. And that he goes hard at this stuff. And I'll give him credit. When he says this stuff, he's very sure of himself. And his body language is very if you're just looking at this like as a body language sort of expert, and I'm no expert, but I would imagine that you can look at this body language. Gavin Newsom is on the attack. He's leaning in, he's pointing at Brian, saying, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. Brian's just kind of sitting there taking it. And I think when he's talking to the moderators as opposed to talking to Gavin Newsom, but we'll listen to a little bit more about what he has to say regarding price gouging.
And we're getting serious about the stress and pain Californians are facing.
Senator Dahle likes to respond.
Well, first off, the governor talks about ripping people off. I have not received 1 cent for my campaign from anybody in the pro-life movement or from oil in this campaign. Not 1 cent. The governor wants to talk about climate change, and it's global warming is the issue. We're exporting jobs and our environment out of California to places like China, where they're making a coal-fired power plant every 3 weeks. Gavin Newsom talks about the reality of climate change. I presented a bill a couple of years ago to count carbon from forest fires. Do you know that in California, we don't even count emissions from forest fires, but every day he's regulating combustible engines and driving up the cost of energy in California. Californians pay more energy. I have nothing to do with big oil. They haven't supported my campaign. The governor is focused on his message to America. Californians are fleeing California for one reason, because they can't afford to live here, and he's out of touch with the everyday, hardworking, middle-class Californians. Now, yes, his elite friends can afford Teslas at $70,000, but Californians on the whole have no opportunity but to just suffer from the policies that Gavin Newsom's put forth.
He's repeatedly referred to you being out of state. And I want to ask very clearly, you were asking voters for 4 more years. Do you commit to serving all 4?
Yes. And I've barely been out of state. I was out of state for a few hours.
You heard it here first. He commits to 4.
To take on his party. And his leader of his party, Donald Trump, who he was a passionate supporter of, and what they're doing. A
passionate supporter.
And how they're attacking women's right to choose, how they're banning books in unprecedented level, and how they're banning speech and rewriting history. This is a serious moment in American history, California history. Their demonization, their demeaning of the gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community. I've had enough. So I'll proudly and happily stand up. What you don't do is stand up to big oil and these big interests.
I've said the thing with the whole transgender community, I don't really understand it. I don't know where this is coming from. This has become something that the left is absolutely obsessed with the transgender community when they're probably a percentage point of a percentage point. I'm not really sure. It's crossing the line a little bit too much. Anything to do with transgenders and kids just crosses the line for me. But he does the old attack of like, well, you love Donald Trump. Newsom's got his talking points, and you got to give him credit that he hammers them home with authority.
The reality is we don't, by the way. It's interesting fact. I love all this energy stuff. They pay higher electricity bills in Texas, in Florida, in Indiana than they do in the state of California.
That's not true. According to Forbes, I think it was Forbes, I was reading an article that California still costs more. The cost of living is still more expensive in California than in Texas. So yeah, that's absolutely not true. When you talk about the watts or kilowatts that you spend, how much you spend on it for your electricity, California is the highest.
We've seen energy costs go through the roof in those states. They're doubling down on stupid, on coal and nuclear, on issues that I say nuclear in the context not of our Diablo Canyon extension, but on old fossil politics.
Notice how he caught himself there. He said stupid is coal, nuclear. He went right to nuclear, and then he had to catch himself and go, whoa, wait a second. Because someone was going to say, actually, there's nuclear here in California, and you helped save Diablo Canyon. So the fact that he had to catch himself and say, oh, actually, nuclear is not stupid. I support nuclear, but will you support building more nuclear? Probably not. The only reason he saved Diablo Canyon is because if Diablo Canyon went offline, California would be in a much, much worse crisis when it comes to electricity. So he had to catch himself there.
Policies, including gas, that are actually creating the problems we're trying to solve. California's moved in a different direction. We now have 6 times more clean tech jobs, clean jobs, than we do fossil fuel jobs. This is the next great opportunity and economic benefit for Californians and Americans, and we want to seize on that opportunity.
I want to be clear,
and we are not interested in outsourcing those jobs. We want to dominate in this clean energy.
I just want to be clear, that was a yes on 4 more years.
Yes.
All right, Senator Dahle, simple question. Did Joe Biden legitimately win the 2022 election against Donald Trump?
Yeah, he did win the election, but the big question is he?
It's actually a funny moment.
That's what I wonder sometimes. But I want to talk about.
You're talking about he being who?
Joe Biden.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
he knows what he means by he's playing dumb.
I wonder sometimes if he actually realizes that he's president of the United States.
Of course he recognizes, and that's you're insulting the president of the United States.
You're insulting him.
He's president of the United States.
Go on.
So now it's okay to
doubling down on stupid.
It's not okay to insult Joe Biden, the sitting president of the United States. But Gavin Newsom had 4 years of insulting Donald Trump.
That this governor's put forward
Got it.
Don't work in California. Californians are suffering from the cost of living in California. Crime is running rampant. I know the governor talks about all this national stuff. He wants to talk about, a president that's not even in office. He wants to talk about our party. He wants to talk about everything but the facts of what I see and hear every day on the street. Californians are suffering because of your policies. I know that your friends and the people you run with, don't actually can afford to live in California. But the everyday, hardworking, middle-class Californian governor is suffering from the policies you put forward. At the same time, we have no water. We have no electricity. We have no plan. Your plan, there is no plan. There's just throw money at it. You've had more money in the time you've been in office than there's ever been in California, and people are fleeing California. That's the facts. I know that you don't want to recognize that, and you want to talk about all these national issues because you can't talk about the facts that Californians are suffering because of high inflation and the policies that you've put.
California is suffering from high inflation, and that's why we've provided $18.5 billion in tax rebates, which you opposed.
Because we all know the best way to fight inflation is for the government to give out more money. And not only that, it's only a couple $100 for most people. So his whole thing is we've given all this money out conveniently 2 weeks before the election. And it goes to, yeah, it may pay for a couple gas bills and stuff like that, but inflation's not going anywhere and it's gotten a lot worse. So he keeps touting this for some reason. Well, he's touting it because he believes it's a win for him and it sounds great. I'm giving all this money out. Look at how wonderful I am. Give me the job. I'll keep giving more money out.
You oppose $9.5 billion in rebates that are going out right now to help offset these inflationary costs. The question to you
That's
is,
not true.
why did you oppose that budget? Why did you oppose that appropriation?
I supported that. You need to go look at the record. I actually supported that.
That's just not true.
Senator Dahle, let me ask a slightly different question. You have called, and your fellow Republicans, for a gas tax holiday to get rid of the 54 or so cent gas tax, but there's no guarantee that that'll end up in the pockets of consumers. So how do you propose the state bring down the gas price in a meaningful way for consumers?
Well, there's 1,200 oil wells sitting at the desk of the governor waiting to get permitted in California, and he prefers not to get those permits out.
But you've called for a gas tax holiday.
Yeah, well, the gas tax holiday is the fastest way you can actually help drive down inflation. I own a trucking business. In the last 8 months, because of the governor's policies, it's cost $200 a day to put diesel in that truck. It's $1,000 a week. It's $4,000 a month. That drives up the cost of a gallon of milk, a dozen eggs for every hardworking Californian. So
which people don't seem to understand. They don't.
Across the board, it lowers your food.
People don't seem to understand, and this is one thing that the climate activists don't really seem to understand, because a lot of, like Brian is pointing out, is the people who are wealthy enough or rich enough to have the ability and the financial wherewithal to have a Tesla, to go shop at Whole Foods, to do all this stuff, and to pretend that they're so morally virtuous as opposed to everybody else, is that they don't realize that they can sit there and look at the gas prices going up and laugh and say, like, that's good, it'll force more people into electric cars and I get to tell everyone I told you so. When in reality, they don't see the actual impact that it has on a majority of Californians, those of the lower and middle class, which is that everything goes up when it costs more to ship it. And when fuel costs more to ship it, to get those, to get the avocados to Whole Foods, they go up in price because they have to make up for the fuel costs. It gets passed along the chain, and a lot of climate activists don't see that. They would rather everyone hurt and suffer under these enormously inflationary prices, and they don't see it that way. And Brian's explaining this right now, that everything costs more because gas is going up when climate activists are shouting that we all need to get into green electric cars.
Not only the gas you put in your tank. So those are the policies we put forth. We had the budget to backfill to take care of the highways in California. We should have done that. It would have gave Californians and families about a $1,700 rebate a year ago.
But how do you guarantee that if the tax goes away, that it's actually going to go to consumers and not just to the oil companies?
Well, you make sure that it's dropped at the pump.
How do you ensure that? I mean, they're private companies. They don't have any obligation.
The biggest tax in California on gas and oil, the biggest profiter of it is the government. They make, actually, that's just the 54 cents is the highway tax. Right. All government taxes is $1.42 a gallon.
So you guys wanted to take all of those?
No, I'm just saying, at the end of the day, if you drop down the gas tax, you're dropping down across the board food for people, and when you put gas in their car, and we'll force the companies to make sure that the money goes to actually lowering the price of a gallon of gas.
How do you force them?
Well, we make sure that they do it through their taxes that we push down.
This was
Governor,
a rough answer for
Maybe
Brian.
I mean,
I don't really know how you do it
and we've seen other
unless you
states
pass
that
more
have moved,
legislation, which I'm not a
with
fan
gas
of,
tax reductions,
forcing
and we haven't
companies.
seen the commensurate reduction because there is no guarantee. It means more money in the pocket of big oil companies. Everything he just said is literally stripped and ripped from the talking points that big oil provides to him and his colleagues.
Why is it
And
not $2.50 a gallon lower in Nevada?
It's $2. Why? It's $2. We were paying a few weeks ago upwards of $2.60 more than the national average because these companies are ripping you off and ripping us off.
Now, this is something that when I was watching this, I fail to understand. Why, out of all the states, why do the big oil companies choose California to rip us off? Why don't they rip everybody off, right? Why don't they just rip everybody off and make gas $5 a gallon everywhere? He talks about these big oil companies like it's John D. Rockefeller and it's this big monopoly and this big trust that all these companies are going to be colluding and they're doing it on purpose and they're ripping you off and that's what they want to do. Why is it California is the only state that has $5, $6 a gallon gas? $7 at one point in places of like LA. Why is that? He never really gets into that. He says it's almost like the big oil companies have this big conspiracy. Now, this is tinfoil hat stuff that Noodles is pushing out there. Tinfoil hat stuff to say that it's the big oil companies are all just going after Californians. They're forcing Californians to suffer at the pump. Why? He can't really explain that. He just says it's just these oil companies ripping you off. While if you just go out of state, across border, if you're in Southern California, if you head over to Yuma, gas drops $2, probably more than $2 immediately. The minute you cross state lines in Arizona, it's $3.50 or $3. So why all of a sudden, why aren't the gas companies, these big evil oil companies, why are they not gouging people in Arizona? Why are they not gouging people in Florida or Texas or anything like that? That's something I don't understand. And obviously Noodles has no argument for that, but it's because it's the idea and it feeds into the left's idea of these big greedy oil companies are ripping you off. And you see it on Twitter, you see it everywhere. It's these big oil companies, they're ripping us off. Okay. So the next question you should be asking is, why are they just ripping off Californians?
And that's why I want to move forward with a price gouging penalty to address this abuse. Period. Full stop. Governor, you have 5 refiners that represent 97% of that industry. They have record profits, $26 billion just last quarter, 276% increase, Chevron Corporation alone. They're funding your campaigns and the campaigns of others like you. But let me be very clear. This whole idea that a gas tax somehow is going to provide relief, as you suggest in your questioning, has been refuted, not just by the examples of other states, but by leading economists that say it's nothing more than a gimmick. These rebate checks we're providing and what I just did, and this is important, we have seen a 65-cent reduction since peak in the last few weeks because we ordered the winter blend through the Air Resources Board, and we have seen gas prices go down in the state of California without a gas tax.
So this is something interesting that I noticed Gavin Newsom did, and he was talking out of both sides of his mouth when this story came out. He, at one point, was coming out and saying, I'm going to call a special session. We're going to have the legislature come back, and we're going to create this price gouging bill, however they plan on doing it, to say that we're going to make sure that these gas companies are not gouging us. When the government determines what gouging is, that's always really dangerous. But a lesser story was that he was privately going to these companies and saying, hey, could you switch back to that winter blend that's a lot cheaper and easier to make? Yeah, it makes the gas prices go down, makes me look a lot better. He's admitting that a California regulation, which is the switch between winter and summer blends, does have an impact on gases or gas prices. So right there, his admission that the switch from winter to summer blend does have an impact on price is a implicit admission that there are regulations in California that have an impact on the gas prices.
Repeal that could not guarantee.
You're calling for a special session of the legislature to enact a windfall profits tax. That would be after the election, December 5th, when the new legislature comes in. We've seen no legislation. There's no details. There was a similar effort in the assembly that died earlier this year. So how do we know that it's not a gimmick on your part to be calling for a special session?
Because we're working with legislative leaders and we're working to make
I'm glad he actually pushed back on this moderator.
We're reviewing what's happened in other countries that are pursuing similar policies, different and novel strategies here in the United States. There have been leaders across this country that have promoted similar efforts, and we're looking at the unique characteristics and a deeper dive of understanding of what's driving these gas prices here in California. There is no justification, none whatsoever, for these outrageous, usurious costs in the state of California. It is not $1.42. That's nonsense. That's inaccurate. There is an increase in our environmental rules and regulations, which he wants to roll them all back. There is an increase in terms of those costs, but nowhere near the $2.60 above average national costs that we were paying a few weeks ago. Today.
But again, he doesn't address why just California. Why is California the only one that is suffering from such high gas prices? He doesn't make that clear. He says it very with passion, and he makes it seem like, you know, if you say a lie, it's like George Costanza in Seinfeld. It's only a lie if you believe it, or something. I think that's the line. And basically, if you say it with enough conviction, it will sound like he's telling you the absolute truth that these gas companies are ripping you off. They're out of their way. And I wouldn't put it past them that this is not some sort of cloak and dagger way of punishing gas companies to make them throw up their hands and go, you know what, screw it. We can't make a profit. We can't sell our product because, God forbid, if we make a profit, people are going to say that we're making record profits. And God forbid, we do all this stuff. We invest all this money. We hire all these people. It's going to force some gas companies to just go, hey, screw it. We're out of here. Forget it. And forces them out of the market, which then gives them leeway to say, okay, let's get into the green cars and let's get into the electric cars, which not everybody can afford and not everyone has access to, which again hurts the middle and lower classes.
It's $1.97. The reality is they're ripping you off, taking advantage. And we are working with legislative leaders to get this right. It's never been done at the state level. We want to do it right. And it's the first day back in session on December 5th. We mean business, and we will be publishing and introducing that legislation very, very shortly, and we'll have an ample chance to review it. And I hope, Brian, you support the effort.
I want to know, we asked our audience and partner stations what they wanted to ask you both, and we received over 200 questions. So a lot of the topics we're talking about today, gas prices, homelessness, water, did help shape what we're asking you. We also got a question from KVPR in the Central Valley for you, Governor. As the state moves to phase out fossil fuels, what are you doing to make sure that places like Kern County, which rely heavily on oil for their economy, aren't being left behind? What do you say to workers there who are just worried about their ability to continue making a living?
We don't believe in a just transition. Rhetorically, we put $600 million in this year's budget. My opponent opposed that $600 million allocation to create a framework to provide support and economic opportunities in that region. We modeled it after something called Fresno Drive, which we launched a few years ago, and BK3, which is around the Kern County area in Bakersfield, a novel strategy to build partnerships, public-private partnerships, public-public partnerships. We added this $600 million appropriation so that we can drive a different conversation about what the world looks like in a post-oil future.
Can you talk about where that money goes?
This is important that we just put out. It goes to model programs like the Fresno Drive. The reason I bring up the Fresno Drive, it's a model example of partnerships between the universities, between the private sector, and local and regional, as well as state agencies.
Whoa. So what you're telling me is that you put $600 million aside to go to universities who then turn around and then donate money back to Democrats? Always follow the money, folks. Always, always, always follow the money, especially here in California. Always follow the money.
To drive a new economic and workforce vision for the region. It was such a success that we put those resources up, and we want to see those resources invested. That said, I'm also very proud to see the transition in Kern County already is one of the world's leaders in renewable energy because of our renewable energy policies, because the policy's been an accelerator of providing unprecedented investments in the state. Let me be specific. There are 200 headquartered green energy companies specifically targeting zero and electric vehicles. 43 ZEV manufacturers already in the state of California. It's $1 trillion industry, and we are going to dominate this industry.
If you remember from the last podcast we had, I was making fun of it. I guess that's actually the acronym is ZEV, Zero Emission Vehicles.
The transition, we saw 18%, 17.7% of Californians purchasing electric vehicles. We know this works. These strategies and policies work to
because you're forcing people out of them,
greenhouse gas emissions,
or you're forcing people into green electric cars
to accelerate our economic growth and development in the state of California.
Senator Dahle,
it was a long ass.
I'd like to respond. Sure.
Answer.
The governor talks really slick and smooth about all these processes he's doing. He's had $100 billion in surplus revenue, and then what he's done in the last 4 years is throw money at every single issue, more than there's ever been. And what are the results for Californians? Higher gas prices, inflation, homelessness on our streets. Our schools are failing our children, and people are fleeing California. So I just want the listeners to understand that he's very good at talking about numbers and all the things he's doing. At the end of the day, you can't turn the water on in California. Electricity prices are 20% higher this year than they were last year in California, and people are fleeing California because the policies that this governor puts out, and he wants to demonize the party that I represent, and he wants to talk about those issues.
I'm going to skip ahead because they talk about labor, which is that.
Families leaving public schools. You've chosen to put your kids in private schools. Obviously,
every automotive project is an opportunity.
I forgot to mention that sometimes there's ads on this, so bear with me. So if you can see, there's really not. It's not so much fireworks, but there is a lot that it's just word salad that Gavin pushes out there.
But what do you say to parents who wonder if you have faith in our public schools given that personal decision?
I'm passionate about public education. I'm a product of public education. My kids are going to school right behind.
I'm passionate about public education,
which is about creativity.
A lot of them fund my campaign.
Of things that we're advancing our public education system, and the approach we've taken is to provide that same kind of choice and opportunity that my kids are afforded for every single one of our 6+ million Californians going to public schools. In fact, this year, we did something no other jurisdiction in America's done. My opponent opposed it, and that was providing college savings accounts for 3.4 million incoming kindergartners, $1.9 billion investment. We put a partnership for.
I think it only amounted like $400 or $500 that he gave every kid.
Provided community college for free. We now have new attainment goals.
Which, by the time you get to universities and colleges at that age, if you're a kindergartner now, you get to college, $500 will
K-12 education system
last you about 1 day.
Precipice of order of magnitude reform. Again, not one of these efforts were supported by my opponent.
I want to move along unless you have
I want to talk about education. I actually put my 2 older sons through public education, but I have my daughter in private education because you and I both know that the better education is a private education because our schools are failing no matter how much money he throws at every single issue in the state, by the way. Doesn't matter.
Well, we want to get to those issues, so we do want to talk about
our education system is failing our students. And parents know it. They're leaving our education system. No doubt they are. And you can tell a lie as much as you want, but people are walking with their feet, and they know. It doesn't matter how many times you say it. It doesn't mean it's true. California parents are leaving our education system because it's so poor, and it's not been fixed under your watch or the watch before. And you want to blame anybody You can't blame a Republican. Republicans haven't been in control in California for the last 10 years.
Well, I blame you for not having one imaginative idea except those that were promoted by people like Betsy DeVos, and vouchers and privatization of our public education system, ending public education as we know it. That's what you've promoted. That's what you're for. You've identified problems. We've been consistent identifying solutions and strategies.
And
we know.
We want to move.
And the result is still the same.
All right.
Zero.
Obviously a lot to talk about with education, but we want to move along. Senator Dahle, you oppose abortion, and as governor would have the veto power of the pen when it comes to the budget. This year, California's budget includes some $200 million
the juicy topic of abortion
rights and protecting access to abortion. If you were governor, would you remove that sort of spending if the legislature puts it in the budget?
Well, first off, I want to say yes, I am pro-life. Number one. Number two, I want to talk about Prop 1, and he brought that out in the opening statement.
But the question is about the budget. Just to be clear.
Yes,
as governor.
Well, the governor put $200 million in there to pay for abortions for people from out of our state to come here. That's number one. Number two, the law today is 6 months. You can have an abortion up to 6 months. The governor proposed Prop 1, and the legislature put it on the ballot to expand abortion to the minute before birth. That's what it would be in California. At the same time, he wants to make this a sanctuary state where all of Americans can come here and get an abortion at the expense of California taxpayers. And I know that's a great platform when you're running for the president of the United States, but here in California, people are struggling. And yes, I would absolutely take that out of the budget.
That was $200 million for reproductive services. So that was not all for out-of-state travel.
Okay, again, reproductive services. You can't keep saying reproductive services when it's only one way, right? Am I crazy? Am I taking crazy pills or something like that? Because you can't call it reproductive services if it's only for one thing. Unless you're providing $200 million for people who want to actually start a family, then you're not providing money for reproductive services. You are providing you're providing money to be non-reproductive, right? That's the goal here. And I think that's something that Republicans have to get a little bit better at pointing out is you can't let them slide and say, it's reproductive services. It's reproductive services. It's not reproductive services. And you have to push them on it and say, okay, $200 million, point to me in here. And point to me where you invest in allowing people to get fertility treatments or IVF or something like that. Can't point to it, then it's not reproductive services. It has nothing to do with reproduction. Okay, you're anti-reproductive services, right? That's what you're funding. You're funding anti-reproductive services. And a lot of times, for some reason, Republicans get kind of caught off guard, and oh, we support reproductive because it's they want to fall all over themselves and be like, we want to say we're for this and we don't want to be called bigots or misogynists and stuff like that. Of course, we're for reproductive services, but you got to push back at a certain point and say you're lying. They're not reproductive services. They're anti-reproductive services because none of this money is going to people to actually help them reproduce.
I will absolutely fund reproductive services, but I am not going to fund out-of-state abortions.
What about in-state abortions?
No, I will propose that, yes, I'm pro-life. I don't think we should. Reproductive services, absolutely prefer.
So you'll take out of the budget any help with women.
Right, I have to get that through no governor has full control over the budget. He has to work with the legislature, and I'll work with the legislature to put a budget together that will work for California.
Would you allow abortion funding in a budget you sign?
If that's what it takes to get the deal done, I'll sign a budget that I work through with the legislature. I'm a third of the budget.
But with respect, you're not pro-life. You're pro-government mandated birth. If you were pro-life, you would support our efforts to provide support for childcare and preschool and prenatal programs. You've consistently opposed those programs. We believe
that is also one of the worst lies that I'll hand it to the Democratic think tanks sat in a room and they figured it out and they said, how can we point out and do a gotcha on Republicans and conservatives who are pro-life? We'll say you're not really pro-life because you don't believe in child care services or kindergarten or stuff like that. I don't see how those two things really kind of fit together, but somehow they've grappled that line and they've run with it to say that you are not pro-life if you're anti-child care services. No, because we are already pro-life. There is a life here. That's what you're talking about. That life has to get here and be born. However, you are proposing that there are less of these lives, these little children, through funding with $200 million in your budget for anti-reproductive services. So that should be something that Republicans should turn around and conservatives should turn around Democrats and say, don't say you're pro-life because you fund childcare services when you want to fund the decision and the procedure so that that child who even ends up in childcare services is not even born. So they've run with this, and you hear it time and time again, and it's just so exhausting that they talk about, oh, we're pro-life, we're more pro-life because we believe in these government programs.
Even reproductive freedom. We believe in reproductive care. California's values.
You don't believe in reproductive care. You don't believe in reproductive freedom.
Under Prop 1 in the Constitution. I was proud to support and promote a budget of $200 million to reduce copays and access to reproductive care. And yeah,
it's not reproductive care and it's not reproductive services. Stop calling it reproductive services.
And girls all across this country that are fleeing persecution and fleeing the kind of, extreme policies that you're promoting. And let me just close on that. What my opponent believes is some 10-year-old that's raped by her father should be forced to bear her brother or sister. His position.
USA Today found in a statistic that less than 1% of abortions are a result of rape. But that always seems to be the go-to, is that extreme. And this is one of those things. If you went to a leftist and said, fine, let's make it legal in rare cases of rape and incest. So that 1%. Can we agree on that? Everything else that's not rape or incest, we put a cap on it. We put a 10-week cap on it. We put a heartbeat bill on it. Will you make that deal? Will you make that deal? No, then it's not really what you're not advocating just for these extremes. You're advocating for everything. So
is extreme. And that is something I hope the people of the state of California consider when they go and vote this November.
Governor, I want to change topics to something that's been mentioned, which is water. We're in the fourth.
I want to respond to that. He talks about extreme. Extreme is not ever having a conversation. Your party just put on the ballot. The Californians will decide whether Prop 1 extends the life, the abortion to the minute before birth.
To be clear, I mean, you're saying that could possibly allow that, but there's nothing in there to say that they're changing the viability limit, which is in statute right now.
No. This is where the biasy of KQED jumps in. She jumps in, and now she's arguing against Brian Dahle, saying, no, that's not true. Well, let's go back to our civics class here, right? Let's go back to our civics. A law is something that's passed by the legislature. Our republic is governed by a kind of tier system. The ultimate law of that land, whether it's the entire United States or the state of California, because the state of California has its own constitution, is the Constitution. That's the supreme law of the land. So if you pass an amendment to the Constitution of California that says there shall be no restriction on access these procedures, I don't remember the exact wording, but basically it says there should be no restriction. That means that any law that actually tries to put restrictions will be overruled as unconstitutional. So this girl doesn't understand that if the Constitution says there will be no restrictions, then guess what? The statute she's mentioning, which is true, there already is a statute in place of viability. that could be wiped out because there is a constitutional amendment that says there shall be no restriction. And if there's a viability restriction, that goes against the Constitution. Therefore, it could be struck down in court.
Correct.
My point is that we don't ever get the opportunity to have that conversation. It's just all or nothing. That's what's going to happen under this Prop 1. And so the people will choose, and we'll know November 8th.
We will.
Where they're going to be.
Well, we know where you stand, and we know your opposition to Proposition 1. It's demonstrable. You put $20,000.
I did not put any money against any proposition.
$20,000 went in to oppose Proposition 1. And the bottom line is the people of the state of California will have the opportunity to adjudicate different points of view. We're very proud of this state. We're proud of its leadership, proud of the Women's Caucus, proud of the legislature.
All right, we're going to move along.
Putting this on the ballot.
All right, we're going to move along.
We're proud of
in the fourth year
allowing unfettered.
Unlike Governor Brown, Governor Newsom, you have not issued an
All right, let's skip
order
ahead.
mandating statewide restrictions
Housing,
on
homelessness.
water use. You're leaving it to local
Time
water
is it?
district.
And more to address it in the last 4 years than potentially ever before. And yet, the visible issues of encampments and homelessness and street behavior and drug use appears to be worse than ever in many places around the state. What do you say to voters who feel like this is not getting better?
They're right. It's an outrage. It's unconscionable what's happening on the streets and sidewalks. That's why we're requiring accountability plans. I have 75 accountability plans. We're not going to hand out any money any longer. Local governments can't produce real results. We provided them $750 million in encampment grants to address the issue of encampments. We're providing them new tools with a care court to address the vexing issues of mental health. Of course, my opponent opposed the funding for care court. We provided them unprecedented.
Probably because care court would be an enormous government bureaucracy that would cost a lot of money, and we don't know if it's going to work.
New units have been procured.
What
just
is it?
in the
Are
last
more
number
people
of months.
becoming homeless, do you
The
believe?
bottom line, in the last 2 years with COVID and all of the headwinds.
It's always interesting that a leftist argues from this position of, well, I proposed something and you opposed it. Okay, is there a reason why he opposed it, or is it just he opposed it, so therefore he's a bad person? They never really get into that, and I think this is one thing that Brian could have done a little bit better of in this debate. Is Newsom threw out a lot of accusations about stuff that he opposed. And I think it would have behooved him to kind of take these opportunities to say, I oppose these bills because it would have done X, Y, and Z and would have been a cost to the California taxpayer. And point out the flaws in what he's proposing. And again, you've heard me talk about this ad nauseum when in any of my shows, I always talk about this. You can't be the party of no. You can't just be the opposition party that just always says no. You can't be the contradiction party. No one votes for the contradiction or the contrarian candidate. So what you have to do instead is you have to point out, here's your argument, here's what you propose, why is it bad, and here's what I can do better. And I think that's a missed opportunity by Brian, is that Newsom did say a lot of things. He opposed this, he opposed that, he opposed this. And Brian didn't really capitalize on it and say, well, I oppose it because these things are bad. Here's my reasonings. And I think that Californians deserve better.
Winds of COVID, there was a laissez-faire attitude in terms of addressing what was happening on the streets and sidewalks. But you're right. The premise of your question is accurate. When I got here, there was no homeless strategy, no plan, no resources of any merit. Today, there's $15.3 billion. There's a real strategy, real plan, and there's accountability for the first time. All of that opposed by my opponent consistently, nowhere to be found. His entire policy for homelessness is some illusory policy of, well, we'll just do an audit. I've been around long enough to know when someone says their response to a problem is an audit, they don't have a response.
All right, Senator Dahle, you have been very critical of the governor's.
So this is a perfect spot where he should be going into, why do I say there should be an audit? Because, well, you spent $15 billion. Here's where the homeless is today. Here's where it was 5 years ago. And we can see a straight trajectory line up and go, that's a lot of money you've spent, and we don't know where it went. And I think Californians deserve to know where that money went.
Response to homelessness. And I noticed that just last week you joined your Republican colleagues to call on the legislature and governor to declare a state of emergency and ban encampments within 1,000 feet of sensitive areas. Would that solve homelessness?
Well, at least it will help children who are going to school be able to be free and be safe to get to school where there's a homeless campus around schools. But I want to talk about homeless for a minute. There's a theme here. The governor talks about my party and all the things that are happening, but the theme is that he throws money at everything. But what are the results? Exactly. What are the results? He spent $20 billion, $75,000 per homeless person, and we have 22,000 more. It is growing. Absolutely. We know the number. 22,000 more. So the theme of this debate is that the governor has all this great talk, but the policies don't actually fix the problem. If you want to tackle homeless, I was a county supervisor for 16 years. He said in 2003, when he was the mayor of San Francisco, he was going to end homelessness. I just drove down the street here today, stepping over people defecating on the street and needles. He hasn't fixed it.
What would you not do that the state's doing now?
I would do, number one, about 75% of the people that are homeless are addicted to drugs. Day one as governor, I would make fentanyl a state of emergency and tackle fentanyl. 5,700 people died from fentanyl in California. Twice the amount of people in this city.
What would a state emergency do? I want to understand.
It would focus on the fact that fentanyl is an issue in California. People on the streets are addicted. We need to get them off of drugs. That's the first thing you do to get them on the projection out, is get them off of drugs. Fund the counties with the mental health programs that they need and the clinicians, and then drive down the cost of housing in California are the three things that would need to happen for.
That's something I've always said. No one ever talks about the underlying issue of homelessness, which is it's really damn expensive to live here in California. We need to make that better.
To take care of homelessness.
And then
Governor, you did promise
opposed all these efforts. We have $11.6 billion of investments on the issue of mental health, $3.5 billion specifically for boarding care homes and rapid rehousing for mental health that we've just now put up and put out. And on the next few years, we're going to see the results of those efforts. You've consistently opposed them.
Is
As
housing
it relates to, and this is important, somehow a state of emergency, and then we're going to magically solve fentanyl. That's what my opponent just said. Somehow magically it will disappear on the basis of a state of emergency.
Wait a second. Wait one gosh darn second. Is this the same guy who's lecturing Brian Dahle about state of emergencies, who is finally, after 3 years, ending a state of emergency on COVID? Is this the same guy who believes that if you just declare a state of emergency, it's all going to go away? Right? It's all going to go away. State of emergency. He's held on to it for 3 years. So it's funny, he plays down that Brian Dahle wants to declare a state of emergency on fentanyl, coming from the guy who really loved his state of emergency for 3 years. He's probably going to be very sad the day it ends.
That somehow he will adopt a secret strategy that somehow will absolve any deep accountability for the fact he's consistently opposed our efforts to address fentanyl. Let me be more specific.
What
you opposed the budget that we just advanced of $7.9 million in the Department of Justice for 25 new people to create a new criminal investigations unit. You opposed the National Guard, of which we have 100 National Guard on the border addressing fentanyl. And you know what? You should know this. You're unaware of this. 14,000 pounds of fentanyl we've gotten off the street, 238 search warrants that we provided last year. It's an 238%
that sounds unconscionable
over the
in California.
previous years because of our efforts. We put out a strategy, not just on interdiction, which you opposed, but also a strategy to relates to fentanyl and opioid abuse, which you opposed, which is a strategic plan with 40 state agencies and nonprofit partners. You oppose the funding for that focuses on treatment and prevention, and it focuses on new strategies for managing pain. You opposed all of those things.
Okay.
Again, perfect opportunity, and the moderators should allow Brian Dahle to respond if you're going to say, you opposed X, Y, and Z. Okay, that's an allegation, that's an assertion. You should allow the other side to counter. And I don't think it looks very good when you sit there and don't say anything to defend yourself.
Senator, quick question or quick response.
I was going to say, otherwise talking about me. Yeah, I opposed his budget because he spends money with no results, and all the things he talks about don't ever achieve results. And so when he's talking about fentanyl and all these things, really walk down the street. I just ask Californians to walk down the street. Look in your neighborhoods. You know the difference that this governor is really smooth at talking, but at the end of the day, he delivers zero.
All right, we're going to move along. if you're elected governor, the legislature is
All right,
likely
let's see
to
what else
remain
they
in
have to
Democratic
say.
hands. And so, but there are some things a Republican governor could do. Governor Newsom, for example, issued a moratorium on executions. There's now 36 people on death row that have exhausted their legal appeals and would be eligible for execution. If you're elected, would you end the moratorium and allow those executions to go forward?
Yes.
Going above and beyond for our members.
So, again, take this moment to kind of catch our breath. There's only a couple more things left, and then I'll kind of wrap it up. But
and then
I'll just take.
How does that square with your pro-life position?
Here we go with the
Look,
pro-life.
They committed a crime against other people, and a jury chose to. I support the death penalty.
Would you have any qualms about 36
the city council in Santa Monica years and years ago?
Reparations.
Deep pride that we
don't really care about
to
that.
right that wrong. And so this task force is convening. We'll see where their recommendations come out, and we'll make a determination after the fact.
Do you want to add anything?
Let's go. Let's do. We'll finish on public safety and criminal
Higher
justice.
threshold. I mean, the reality at the end of the day, they've used it as a scapegoat, to excuse their, they oppose all of these criminal justice reform efforts. He's consistently opposed all of these reform efforts. We believe in common sense criminal justice reform. The reality is he also opposed our crime reduction plan, $758 million investment that, by the way, included 1,000 new CHP officers, which you opposed, $55 million to address their wellness and mental health, which you opposed, $200 million for crime prevention, evidence-based crime prevention plans and strategies, or rather grants for strategies, which you oppose.
In this debate, the key is really, if you want to flip it on its head, is you really just got to say, I oppose this because it's crap. And let me explain why and why my solution's better.
In this country, and as you know,
he's really kind of a one-trick pony, which is you oppose, you oppose, you oppose, you oppose, all these things.
Are Republican-led state, 40% higher per capita rates in the states that Donald Trump won. This is an issue that has no political jurisdiction. The realities are real. We need to own up to those realities. We put out strategies and plans, but I'm not going to use the tried and true strategies of the far right to scapegoat a reform that cannot directly be connected to these trends.
Senator Dahle,
I don't even really know what he said in that one.
Yes, absolutely.
That was truly word salad because I have no idea what he said.
In the last 2 years in California, Gavin Newsom let out 30,000 prisoners out of prison. That's a fact.
I have no authority to let anyone out, so that's not a fact.
The other thing is,
you have no authority to let anyone out. You're the governor. You have the authority to pardon anyone.
Which allows you to rape an unconscious woman, and it's not a violent crime in California.
Well, that's the only. If you only get that as a enhancement, but not an underlying rape charge.
We actually brought a bill together.
Why did that girl think that was funny? Like, I don't understand that. She was like, that's silly. That's preposterous. Raping someone who's unconscious. Preposterous.
This year to actually make.
And again, she's arguing for Gavin Newsom. She's arguing against Brian Dahle.
A felony, and his administration killed that bill.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Governor, in 2020, you emphatically supported and signed a bill to create a reparations task force. Will you support their recommendations?
Okay, so that's basically it for it, because then they go on to talk about reparations and they go on to talk about all that. So with that said, here's my final thoughts on the debate. Nothing really crazy, but I think it's important that you did watch it. And I think the one thing I want to kind of go over is the language that the left uses and that people like Gavin Newsom uses. And a lot of this stuff that we talked about, or he talked about in terms of reproductive freedom or reproductive rights or stuff like that. That is very clever language. All right. And you have to be able to identify that the left uses, which is they say these things like it's reproductive rights or it's reproductive freedom. As we've talked about, that it's neither of those things. And another thing is when you are saying someone opposes something, it's very important that you also say, if you're being alleged of it, that you say, I oppose these things because they are crap. And here's my solution because they are better than your solution, which is crap. It's not enough to just kind of point out that Gavin Newsom has not done a good job. And I think that's one critique I would say of Brian Dahle, is that he spent most of the debate really kind of just pointing out how bad Gavin Newsom is. And it's not entirely his fault. It was kind of like a 3-on-1 situation where the moderators were setting it up so that Brian Dahle would look bad. Like the death penalty question. Would you allow this to happen if there was a death penalty? Okay, well, there's a death penalty in California. A jury of his peers convicted these people to the death penalty. And that's how our criminal justice system works. And then, of course, they go right into well, how does that fit in with your pro-life stance? Because that's not what we're talking about. Instead, it's probably better if conservatives and Republicans just start saying, instead of pro-life, we're pro-birth. Like, that should really be it. We're pro-birth on the issue of abortion, because they take this whole pro-life thing, and as you saw, they said, well, you're not pro-life because you don't believe in child care services. You're not pro-life because you believe in the death penalty, X, Y, and Z. So there are things that you look at how the left argues, and it's not that hard to beat, and it's not that hard to break down and get better at defeating them at their own arguments. And like I said, I think Brian Dahle, I don't think it was his best performance. I've never seen him debate before. The difference is that Newsom is just way more polished as a politician. He's very good at this. He knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's talking about, or he knows what he's spewing, that's for sure. I wouldn't say any of that is mostly factual, but he definitely is confident in what he says, and he's slick in the way he says it, and he knows how to get Brian Dahle on his heels. But once you've heard it enough, if this is the best you have, if this is the slickest, best talking, charismatic leader you have in the Democratic Party, who will likely run for president in 2028, it's easy to take his talking points and his arguments and break that stuff down and rebut it. It's not that hard, right? It is. You have to work with it a little bit, and it's like anything. It's like when a baseball player watches a video of a pitcher and how they make a delivery. Then you can go up to bat and you understand what you're going to hit, and you can watch their delivery. It's the same exact principle. You have to be able to look at this, and a lot of this kind of comes down from the top down in the Democratic Party, where they get these talking points, and you know what their talking points are going to be, so you can work around them. And I think a lot of times is Democrats are very good at pushing Republicans into a box. And I've talked about it before. If you haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. Don't Think of an Elephant. It was actually written by a leftist. I call them a leftist because I don't like to call these people progressives, because nothing of what they do is actually progressive. And his whole thing is, when you argue in someone else's argument, you are always going to lose. 10 times out of 10, you're always going to lose that argument. So you have to get better at framing the argument your way and pushing your opponent back into your argument and in your framing. So with that said, nothing really kind of like groundbreaking in this debate, nothing really too spicy, no viral moments. I think Brian was trying to go for that viral moment of like, hey, we're glad you could take time off from running for president. He kind of tripped over that line a little bit. I think maybe he was too excited to get it out. But nothing really super viral. Newsom, he's a slick car salesman. He knows what he's doing. But let me know in the chat. What do you think? Do you think it was an okay debate? Was it fine? Was it nothing really changed your mind? I assume if you're here, want that to go back. Let me know what you think. So yeah, that's my thoughts. Someone says in the chat, spinning Republicans into a box. You got to stay on topic. Yeah, absolutely. You have to be able to stay on topic. You have to be able to point out, and you can't just be, we're the party, you're bad, and we oppose everything you are because you're bad, and we're just going to talk about how bad you are. Because there's no vision. There was no vision really proposed from Brian Dahle's camp, where they said, here's what I would do, and here's the things I would lay out and the things I would make better. And again, he wasn't sort of a 3-on-1 situation, but either way, you should know that going into KQED. You know you're going to be debating the moderators. You have to just kind of know what you're talking about. So with that said, we're getting close to election day. Still talking about maybe doing a live election broadcast. That would be fun. Um, Dahle was right about everything someone says in the chat, just about everything, but nothing that would convince people who didn't already agree. Yeah, I don't think it comes across as getting a lot of the independents. But so we got a couple more weeks, less than 2 weeks until election day. Talking about maybe doing an election live stream. We'll figure that out. Get details to you. And with that said, as always, every Thursday night, and if you enjoyed this podcast, like I always say, just share it with a friend. Text somebody, say, hey, check out this podcast. That's the best thing you can do if you want to support the show. Text someone or talk to someone, or old school, talk to someone, something like that. And make sure to like, share, subscribe, review, comment on this video when it's all done. Helps with the algorithm. And I will see you all later. Good night, everybody.